This episode is brought to you by Green Skies Analytics, an audit analytics service provider that works with internal audit departments that have data analysts and are still frustrated with trying to make analytics actually work, aren't getting the expected ROI, who can't break through the communication barrier between the analysts and the audit team, and those that need experienced direction for an audit analytics strategy and process. Those that feel like they've wasted time and money on trainings, aren't getting the value they want, not prioritizing the highest risk areas for the organizations, or have projects that seemingly never get completed. Do you deal with any of that? If you do, go to the show notes of this episode and click the Green Skies Analytics link, or go to greenskiesanalytics.com to schedule a call and understand how Green Skies Analytics makes analytics actually work for internal audit.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Audit Podcast. I am your host, Trent Russell, and today we're doing another best of episode. And it probably is no surprise to most folks that AI is the topic of choice here as we go into 2025. So these are the best of clips from AI leaders, audit leaders, and their perspective on AI, etc. So first up, we have Badal Patel. He is the audit analytics leader at Meta, and he's talking about AI tools in the audit process.
What have you all, either with data or some AI tools, how are you using those in the audit process, whether that's planning or controls testing, risk assessment, reporting? How are you using any and all of those?
Yeah, so in our audit process, we emphasize the importance of focusing on the specific problem or task at hand, and then applying the appropriate technology to address it. I don't want to sort of force technology to drive the process. We want to instead let the problem or the test at hand dictate the solution. And with that said, we leverage data analytics to efficiently test large amounts of data quickly, identifying either patterns for planning or performing testing that sort of generates exceptions that may have been missed through the traditional methods. So a lot of what our typical internal audit shops are used to in terms of leveraging analytics. Generative AI plays a role in this by assisting us in suggesting maybe some areas of focus, generating or refining text that adheres to our internal style, in terms of like guideline from a department standpoint, and even being able to predict future risks. And this combination enhances our efficiency and significantly improves the accuracy and depth of our audits, sort of take it into the next generation of auditing.
Okay. What about anything specific in planning? I know with data, when it comes to controls testing, it's pretty straightforward. Reporting can be pretty straightforward also. Risk assessment, not so much. But then planning, to me, is still, it's so, once we come into it, scope maybe not be set. There's so much that we can do with the data at that point. Is there any go-to techniques or anything specifically you could speak to in the planning phase that you like to do?
Yeah, in terms of planning, there's no one-click solution that will, at least at this point for us, that will generate these insights or some useful type of planning use cases. But we like to take it in form of a framework. So using generative AI, like a step-by-step sort of process, have it analyze if it was a repeat audit, and bring in the previous audit results, summarize the information that was learned from there. What were the observations, right? That could be step one. Another step would be any business changes, any key organizational changes. You want to bring that into the platform, introduce that as a secondary item, tell the LLM to take that into consideration, and then any emerging risks that either you've already performed or if you want it to perform the risk assessment, bring in the data. So those business changes will be an example, any industry-wide frameworks, as well as looking at large bodies of information that are related to that particular department to then identify the key areas or themes. You could tell the LLM, like, if you give it business changes, maybe some goals using natural language processing, you can tell it, hey, summarize each of these items into key risk areas, and only use 5 for the risk areas, for example. So then from there, right, the platform you could then tell it to, hey, based on the previous audit results, previous observations, business changes, and risks that you've now learned, create an audit plan, right, that prioritizes those high risk areas, and then create the tests, right, associated to the audit plan for this particular audit, and suggest if the more information you give, I think is what makes it innovative. It gives you a lot more context, or gets very specific if you're giving that level of content. I like to use it as, I like to say it's treat it as an intern, for example. Give it more information than is necessary. That way, it can produce results that are more tailored to what you might be looking for.
I think it's a good tip. Treat it like an intern. If there was a good actual takeaway, I think that's it. I've tried to describe, how do you prompt it? I say that it's more opinion than fact. Like, don't take it as what it's saying as an opinion. Take it, as a fact. Take it as kind of opinion and use it that way. But to set it up from the beginning and go, all right, you're an intern that doesn't really know what's going on. Let me give you as much info as I can. That's a really good tip. Next up, we have Ben Phillips. He's the CAE at PetSmart, and he's talking AI and inflation. You said there's basically 2 topics that you all have been talking about, AI and inflation. Probably no surprise that those are the 2 topics, especially AI. Is there anything from those conversations you've had with the CFO Leadership Council that you could share with the listeners to provide some level of insight around those 2 topics, and what is, at the CFO level, maybe even the specifics would be fantastic to the extent you can. What are the specific conversations that are being had around that? And what is your perspective as a CAE, Ben, for those CFOs?
Well, this is such a great question, Trent. I guess, first of all, a little plug for the CFO Leadership Council. I'm on the advisory board for the chapter here in Phoenix, which is a fairly new chapter. I've been doing this for about 3 years. I've made great connections with the community of financial professionals here in the Phoenix area, and have gotten a ton out of that group. And hopefully I can give a few things back on the way. Regarding those 2 topics, I think, if inflation is hurting your company, either through kind of dampening demand and sales or through, margin erosion due to like higher input costs, I think your CFO probably is losing sleep over this, right? And I think internal audit probably is not top of mind as a solution to these scenarios. But I do think, when I think of specifically what can internal audit do, one area I think of on the kind of risk heat map is fraud, right? I think fraud is moving up in terms of likelihood. I think inflation can really change the balance of forces in the fraud triangle. Yeah. Specifically, I think it has the unique potential to create kind of unshareable pressures, maybe for employees that are on a personal level near the financial margins, right? This can ratchet up their incentive to make maybe different decisions, such as engaging in fraudulent behavior. So I think internal audit can, from a practical matter, increase the weighting of that risk factor of fraud in its assessments, and then, really engage in brainstorming and really robust sessions to assess the company's processes. It's the old adage, what could go wrong? What controls do we have? And then try to design procedures to provide assurance around those controls. This, again, right back to analytics. This is an area where analytics, and I think process automation is kind of a related field, can really be a force multiplier for internal audit. Whether we're testing entire populations or using analytical tools like Benford analysis, we have more tools than ever to find those outliers in these massive kind of oceans of transactions and do further investigation. So I think from a practical level, that's something internal audit can do to to help pressures created by inflation.
Okay. And the other topic being AI. I mean, can't we just tell AI to fix inflation? That's how it works, right?
I wish.
What's the nature of the conversation around AI? Is it risk, and we're scared that people are putting data, our company data IP in there,
Yes.
or is it?
I think AI is such a new field, at least relative to how it's applied in kind of corporate operations, that I'd say that the list of unknown unknowns is probably much larger than the list of known unknowns. Sorry to poorly paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld there, but anyways, in terms of the impact of these things on the sleep habits of CFOs, I think the latter category is probably more influential, meaning the known unknowns. I think internal audit has to assess the extent to which their organization either already has or is developing frameworks and controls to protect privacy and proprietary company information. To your example, you don't want employees feeding information into LLMs that are proprietary company information. That I think is the baseline. More sophisticated approaches would have internal audit, I think, looking at use cases where AI-capable tools can enhance operations. And I'm not necessarily thinking about like LLM here, more like machine learning, process automation bots, and the like. I think internal audit can help CFOs understand where the pain points are in their organizations and where tools like automation bots can be applied to either automate the routine tasks or do complicated things quickly that would take an associate a lot of time. So I think there are use cases there if the auditors understand A, how the tools can work and what are their strengths and limitations, and B, where is our company having pain points and inefficiencies.
Next, we have Michael Pellet. He's the director at Lyft, and he's talking about why all auditors should be data experts, but not necessarily AI specialists. So I do want to give you a chance to explain that, why you feel like all auditors need to be data experts. But then I think that the next question after that I was thinking was, okay, well, what about AI? Do you feel like everyone should be AI experts, and what your thoughts around that are? So kind of the difference between the two, and maybe where you're seeing your folks spend more time, or maybe even yourself maybe spend more time. But so to bring that roundabout way of asking, why do all auditors need to be data experts in your opinion? And do you feel like there's starting to be a shift to all auditors need to be AI experts?
So let me parse the question apart a little bit. So first, I'll give you a direct answer on the AI experts. Today, I'm going to say no. And when I'm going to interpret your question as AI, as generative AI, large language models type AI,
Yep.
not sort of the effort to build robotics or systems that are completely autonomous.
Right.
I would say a flat out no on AI, and I'll tell you why I think that. Like there are two elements to generative AI that we are currently dealing with in the modern business environment. One is the sort of open sourced ChatGPT that has used the internet for better or for worse to gather every piece of information it can, kind of pour through that and provide you with either answers or content that you may desire. What that has a lot of great uses, particularly in the areas of improving writing skills, visualizations, video, some of the video things I've seen are just fantastic.
Crazy.
Obviously still images. Periodically we all get hit up on LinkedIn like, hey, improve your headshot, just send us the worst photo of you and we'll make you look like a superstar.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that generative AI that I think is useful, but it's a very specific tool, I think, and in particular areas. Then I would look at the generative AI that lays over top of your existing data streams and your existing systems within your organization. And that one is, and I'm going to oversimplify this, but it's very much a heavily boosted tool that is helping you understand the data you already have. So at the risk of oversimplifying this, and I'm sure many AI experts and generative AI experts will come back and complain with my characterization of this, but it is essentially a data sort of modeling tool, if you will, that sits in with your own data. Now, as with any tool like that is middleware, that's what we used to call it back in the day when I was working on systems. The adage garbage in, garbage out still applies. If your underlying data systems are not giving the information or potentially could contain information that is not correct or erroneous or potentially misleading, then whatever that great tool is on the front end that is pulling it out is going to essentially be repeating information that's bad. And I think we've seen some examples of that, right? Like we've seen some examples on the internet side of just they crawled everything. So you have, horrific images that people were just completely culturally insensitive or et cetera. You've had language that the hallucination factor of things that are wrong, most likely informed from data that it picked up from other sources, whether it's hate content or whatever. And so I think I would argue, no, the internal auditor doesn't need to be an expert on generative AI so much, because that's a very specific software tool. It's a software, tool that lays over existing data systems. I think what the auditor really needs to focus on is, how does that data run on the back end? And to bolster that point of view, I just recently saw Gartner actually came out and was they did it at a conference, but they were just basically talking about really the biggest challenge right now for generative AI within companies using existing company data is problems with data governance, problems with data systems, being poorly managed, problems with, data integrity. And I think that came out just in the last week, like Gartner was doing a conference on this. And I think that's spot on. And if internal auditors who are rushing to, the gap, because everybody's putting a lot of pressure across all areas of the business, we need to be in generative AI. We need to be doing more. We need to, be more efficient. If we can get rid of positions so that people can do more activities, so we can do more with less people, then that pressure has created this false sense of security around what this is actually doing. And I think auditors have the responsibility. We're always the ones that are slowly walking into the fire to understand all the things that need to happen. And I think for an auditor, it's really important for us to understand the back-end data. So let me go into a little bit of that is, how do your systems function? Do you have good data governance? Are your systems talking to each other? And I can tell you, I've worked for very, very small companies. I've started my own company. I've worked for very, very large companies. And the one universal truth of that is nobody has a fantastic data system. It just does. I haven't seen it. I'm sure maybe somebody does, but I just have never seen it. And so there's always problems. There's always problems with data accuracy. There's always problems with, is this the right data or is that the right data? Oh, well, we have a sales system that doesn't actually talk to our invoicing system. So we manually enter invoices and the salespeople are manually doing their things, and half the time they don't reconcile. Understanding those data elements and then how to get through to those data sources and understand if those data sources are actually accurately telling us what they need to tell us is critically important for the auditor, in my opinion, particularly because everything is data-driven now. Like I have not sat in a meeting with a leader in the last 5 to 10 years where the leader hasn't said, well, what are the KPIs? What are the metrics? What are the data points that is telling us what you're saying? Show me the data. And so that's why I feel very strongly that auditors need to be data experts. It's just incumbent upon our role, because I do see a future where auditors are spending about 60 to 80% of their time just working with data. And you're seeing that. I love you were talking to Richard just a few weeks ago about connected risk, and key to good connected risk, which is something I've been working on over the last few years, is having really great data points, is having those key pieces of data that tell you something about the risks that you're facing. And it goes a layer, it can get really deep and it can get really messy. And prior to joining audit, I was in the customer experience space, and it's very similar because in a customer experience environment, the best of breed customer experience teams are pulling all types of data and they're looking at everything. And they're not necessarily saying, oh, we have one metric that's going to tell us everything we need to know. They may have 20 or 30 metrics. And the auditor's responsible for looking back and saying, oh, was that piece of data actually a good piece of data for us to focus on? Or do we need to be expanding the types of data that we're looking at? Or do we just need to do cleanup in our data, kind of our data repositories to make sure that we have those things? So to me, I think that's the argument that I would make. And honestly, one of the big fears that I have about the AI boom right now is we're spending a lot of time on the front end, which is, what are the prompts we want to use for the AI? What do we put into GPT? But I can still see, I just, even when I do Google searches, you still see the AI generated content. And I would say 25, 30% of the time I look at it and I'm like, that's wrong. That's a wrong piece of information. And so we shouldn't be relying on that. And I think the auditor has the obligation to ask the hard question of, hey, how do you know that that piece of data that we're using this large language model AI tool for is accurate?
Next, we have Julio Tirado. He is the CAE and compliance leader at Spirit Bank, and he's talking about responsible AI. Heads up, Julio Tirado was all AI conversation. So if you want more, just a full episode on AI, go check out Julio Tirado's most recent episode, probably 4 or 5 episodes back from where we are right now.
Wanted to get into the topic a little bit more and just understand there are differences. And so there is as an organization, we are developing AI solutions, machine learning solutions, et cetera. And not everyone is there because likely maybe you don't have a center of excellence with a team of data scientists and engineers and architects and the like. But nonetheless, AI is going to get introduced into your organization. So kind of a buy versus build, and any considerations that listeners need to take into consideration for that.
That's a great point. So let's lead on that, because that's exactly something I want to emphasize. So right off the bat, with all the AI we have in society today, in terms of the organizations that use or in any way are related to AI, we can break them down into 2 buckets. We have the builders, just like you just said, companies with machine learning engineers and data scientists. They build the technology. And then there's everybody else. We can call them the consumers. Responsible AI, which I'll define in a minute, tends to be mostly associated with the builders, but it applies to everybody equally. It's just about the perspective and the interpretation and the implementation. But let's define that. So first of all, AI governance is a huge umbrella. And in my view, responsible AI is a subset of that umbrella. So responsible AI can be defined as the development and deployment of an AI system in a way that it is ethical, that is safe, that is sound, that it aligns with your organization's values and, in theory, societal values, okay? So that's high-level definition. You can break the responsible AI area or component into different subparts. You might have heard of fairness and transparency and explainability. I would add privacy. I would add security. One interesting thing to point out about this is that there isn't, at least not to my knowledge, any universal guidance or standard that says, here's all the responsible AI components and the definitions. It differs in many places. Now, I've seen different companies publish their responsible AI principles on their website. So unsurprisingly, company X will differ a little bit from company Y. Of all the ones that I've looked at, the principles that I see most commonly are the first 3 that I mentioned: fairness, transparency, and explainability. And I'll define those in a minute. But data, privacy, and security make a lot of sense too. So in my mind, those are the 5 that should comprise responsible AI. And that's whether you're building the technology, for which this applies quite literally, or whether you are a consumer. And from your perspective, it's a vendor management issue, which we will definitely talk about. So, but let me ask you, I know you mentioned you weren't going to talk, but I got questions for you, Trent. So with all the people that you talk to, I mean, you have many episodes you've published, lots of very smart people, smarter than I'll ever be. You got the annual conference, the Analytics and AI conference, your company, your analytics company, so many different conversations you've had over the last few years. How often does responsible AI come up for you? Or maybe even a few of these components that I mentioned?
Only in the sense of AI governance, but the term specifically responsible AI, I would say has never been mentioned.
That's been my experience too in the circles of internal audit and risk. Now, in the circles of AI, I hear it all the time. And so this is why I think it's important to talk about it within our own people, within our own audit and risk community.
And next we have Richard Chambers, who's the Risk and Audit Senior Advisor to Audit Board. And he's talking about how he creates images with ChatGPT to optimize workflow.
So I use it a lot for writing scripts and analytics. And so to me, I've always told people in that context, it's like having a developer sit there right beside you. And so I'm constantly, nope, that's wrong. Do it this way. Yep, that's right. Thanks. That's good. Update this. No, wrong field, whatever. To the point where I feel bad. It's almost like there is a person and I feel bad going, you did it wrong, do it again. You did it wrong, do it again.
I feel guilty that I keep asking it so many times. But I think that's the scary part about how quickly we begin to think of the AI as another person, as a human. It's happening fast. I was in a meeting last week in New York, and an expert in the field was talking, and he said he thinks that the AI revolution is going to be more impactful than the invention of electricity.
Got it. Wow. Okay.
That was quite a powerful statement.
I've heard some claims. That's the probably the biggest one I've heard so far. But
yeah,
I would say right now I don't necessarily disagree, especially if it's coming from someone that's an expert in that field. Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.